Most people walked past him without even slowing down. The strange part was that by midnight, one simple act of kindness would begin changing the fate of a kingdom hidden in plain sight. Rain hammered the streets of downtown Seattle with the steady rhythm of a drumline, turning sidewalks into rivers of reflected neon light. Traffic crawled through the evening rush, while pedestrians hurried beneath umbrellas, heads down, focused only on getting home. Victoria Turner was no different. After a 10-hour shift at Harbor Street Diner, her feet ached inside worn sneakers, and her shoulders felt heavy beneath her thrift store jacket. The diner had been packed all day. Endless coffee refills, endless complaints. Endless smiles she had forced across her face because tips meant rent, groceries, and another month of surviving. She stepped beneath the small shelter of a bus stop and glanced at her phone. $11.43 remained in her checking account until payday. Not great, but not the worst she had seen. A cold gust of wind swept through the street, carrying sheets of rain sideways. Victoria pulled her umbrella closer and looked down the sidewalk. That was when she noticed him. Most people weren't even looking. They moved around him like water flowing around a rock. An older man sat alone on a bench 50 feet away. No umbrella, no raincoat, no shopping cart, no cardboard sign asking for help. Just a man sitting quietly beneath the storm as if he belonged there. Something about him felt unusual, not because he looked dangerous, quite the opposite. Even soaked by the rain, he sat perfectly still, his prostrate. His hands rested calmly on his knees. His dark coat looked old but strangely well kept. Victoria watched a businessman nearly bump into him without offering a glance. Then a young couple passed, then a woman walking a dog. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked if he was tall. The arriving bus hissed as it pulled toward the curb. Victoria took one step forward, then stopped. She looked at the bus, then at the man, then back at the bus. The driver opened the doors. People climbed aboard. Victoria exhaled slowly. Seriously, she muttered to herself. She was already late, already tired, already broke, yet her feet turned before her brain could argue. The bus doors closed without her. She walked through the rain toward the stranger. Water splashed against her shoes as she approached. The man finally lifted his eyes. They were grey, unusually grey, not cold, not unfriendly, just observant, as if he had been expecting someone. "You're going to get sick sitting out here," Victoria said. The man studied her for a moment but didn't answer. Rain dripped from his dark hair. "Look, I know this sounds weird," she continued, holding out the umbrella, "but take this." His gaze moved from her face. He asked quietly. His voice was deeper than she expected, refined somehow. "I live 6 blocks away." Victoria shrugged. "I can survive 6 blocks. For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes, surprise, maybe even confusion. "You," Victoria laughed softly. "Trust me. Seattle and I have an understanding." The corner of his mouth almost moved. "Almost. Take it," she insisted. "Seriously." For several seconds he said nothing. The city seemed to blur around them beneath the rain. Then he slowly accepted the umbrella. "Thank you," he said. Victoria nodded. "You're welcome." She turned and started walking away before he could refuse. The rain immediately soaked her jacket. Cold water ran through her hair and down her sleeves. But somehow she felt lighter, maybe because she had done something decent, maybe because kindness still mattered even when nobody was watching. Behind her, the man remained seated beneath the umbrella, watching, waiting, thinking. What Victoria didn't know was that less than a mile away, 3 black luxury vehicles had been circling the neighborhood for nearly an hour. Their drivers had been searching for someone. And the moment they saw the umbrella change hands, every one of them stopped moving. Victoria continued down the sidewalk, unaware of the eyes following her from the rain, unaware that the stranger knew far more about her than he should, and completely unaware that just before midnight she would hear a voice behind her that would make her stop cold. Because somehow, impossibly, the homeless man she had never met was about to speak her name. Most people never notice the exact moment their lives begin to change. Victoria Turner certainly did not notice hers. Rainwater dripped from the edge of her jacket as she hurried through the final 6 blocks toward her apartment building. The streets were quieter now. Storefront lights reflected across wet pavement and the city seemed wrapped in a blue-gray haze. She kept replaying the strange encounter in her mind. There had been something unusual about that man. Not frightening, not threatening, just different. The way he spoke. The way he sat in the storm without appearing uncomfortable. The way his eyes seemed to study everything. By the time she climbed the narrow stairs to her 3rd-floor apartment, she had almost convinced herself she was imagining things. Almost. The next morning arrived with low clouds and the smell of fresh coffee drifting through Harbour Street Diner. Victoria tied her apron, balanced 3 plates on one arm, and moved through the breakfast rush with practiced efficiency. Construction workers filled the front booths. Office employees crowded the counter. Nothing unusual, nothing magical, just another day. Around 10:30, her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. She ignored it. 10 minutes later, it buzzed again, then again. Finally, during a short break, she stepped into the hallway near the supply room and checked the screen. The notification came from her landlord. Her stomach tightened immediately. Rent was already overdue. She expected another warning. Instead, she froze. Balance cleared. Victoria read the message twice, then 3 times. The amount listed was exact. Every overdue dollar, every late fee, gone. She immediately called the property manager. "There has to be a mistake," she said. "Someone paid your account this morning," the woman replied. "Everything is current. Who paid it? Anonymous transfer." The call ended. Victoria stared at her phone. Anonymous. Nobody anonymously paid someone else's rent, not in real life. The lunch rush pulled her back to work, but the mystery followed her through every order and every conversation. By late afternoon, she still had no explanation. Across the city, inside the top floor of a black glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay, several people stood silently around a conference table. No one spoke until the tall man near the window finally turned. Roman Marino's expression revealed nothing. The city stretched behind him beneath silver clouds. "She accepted no reward?" he asked. "None," replied one of his advisors. "She does not know the payment came from us." Roman looked down toward the streets far below. "Good." The advisor hesitated. "Your Majesty, the trial was satisfied yesterday. There is no requirement to continue." Roman's gaze remained fixed on the city. "I did not ask whether there was a requirement." The room fell silent again. Back at the diner, Victoria finished her shift shortly after sunset. The mystery of the rent payment still occupied her thoughts. As she exited through the employee entrance, she noticed someone standing across the street, near a small public square. Her steps slowed. The man from the storm. He stood beside an outdoor chess table beneath a maple tree scattered with autumn leaves. He appeared completely different in daylight. Cleaner somehow, more composed, yet unmistakably the same person. Before she could decide whether to approach him, an elderly man sat down across from him at the chess table. The stranger moved a single piece. 3 minutes later, he stood and walked away. The game was over. Victoria watched the older player stare at the board in disbelief. Curious, she crossed the street after the stranger disappeared around the corner. "What happened?" she asked the chess player. The man shook his head. "He beat me in 4 moves. Maybe he plays often, miss," the old man replied, still staring at the board. "I have been state champion twice." Victoria looked down at the chess pieces, then toward the corner where the stranger had vanished. A strange feeling settled in her chest. Something was not adding up. Unfortunately for her, the answer was already moving through the city. And before the week was over, she would discover that the mysterious man seemed to appear everywhere she went. The truly unsettling part was that he always seemed to arrive before she did. By Friday evening, Victoria had stopped telling herself the appearances were coincidences. The city was too large. Seattle held nearly 750,000 people, yet somehow, the same stranger kept crossing her path. Not every day, just enough to make her notice, just enough to leave questions behind. The sky had cleared for the first time all week, and the sunset painted Elliott Bay in shades of gold and copper. Victoria finished her shift and stepped into the cool evening air carrying a paper bag with leftover dinner, rolls the kitchen manager had allowed employees to take home. The streets felt different without rain, brighter, busier. Music drifted from open restaurant patios. Tourists filled the sidewalks. For a few blocks, she almost forgot about the mysterious man entirely. Then she saw him again. He stood near the waterfront, watching ferries move across the bay. His dark coat shifted slightly in the breeze. People passed around him without paying attention. Victoria slowed. This time she was not going to walk away. "Okay," she said as she approached. "Either Seattle is much smaller than I thought, or you have been following me." The man turned toward her. The same grey eyes met hers, calm, unhurried, almost amused. "Do you always accuse strangers so directly?" he asked. "Only the ones I keep running into." A faint smile appeared for a moment before disappearing again. Victoria noticed something she had missed before. Up close, nothing about him felt ordinary. Even standing beside crowded sidewalks and food trucks, he seemed oddly out of place. Not because he looked homeless, because he carried himself like someone who belonged in a completely different world. "I never thanked you properly," he said, "for the umbrella. You could start by telling me your name." For a second, silence stretched between them. Then he looked toward the water. Roman, Victoria waited. Just Roman, for now. That answer only deepened the mystery. Before she could ask another question, a sudden commotion erupted farther down the sidewalk. A delivery cart loaded with stacked boxes rolled free from a nearby ramp and began drifting toward a crowded pedestrian crossing. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, just enough to create confusion among people stepping out into the street. Victoria turned instinctively toward the noise. Several people scrambled aside. A cyclist nearly collided with the rolling cart. Then, almost impossibly, everything stopped. A man in a dark suit appeared from nowhere and calmly caught the cart before it reached the intersection. The entire situation ended within seconds. Most people barely noticed. Victoria turned back toward Roman. "Did you see that?" she asked. "Interesting timing." Roman's gaze remained on the crossing. Sometimes problems are solved before people realize they exist. Something about the answer felt strange. Before Victoria could respond, two black luxury vehicles pulled to the curb across the street. Their windows were tinted. Their engines purred quietly. The people walking nearby hardly paid attention, but Victoria noticed immediately. What caught her attention even more was the reaction of the drivers. Both men remained seated, staring forward with unusual discipline. Neither moved, neither spoke. It almost looked as if they were waiting for instructions. "Friends of yours?" Victoria asked casually. Roman glanced toward the vehicles. For the first time, she saw genuine annoyance flash across his face. It vanished almost instantly. "No," he replied. "Just people who worry too much." One of the car doors opened slightly. A man stepped out and appeared ready to approach. The moment he did, Roman looked in his direction. The man immediately stopped, not hesitated, stopped. Then quietly returned to the vehicle. Victoria stared. That was weird. Seattle is full of weird things. "You always answer questions like that?" "Only the important ones." Victoria laughed despite herself. The conversation should have felt frustrating. Instead, she found herself enjoying it. There was something unexpectedly comforting about him, something calm beneath all the mystery. The ferry horn echoed across the water. Lights flickered on along the shoreline. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Roman looked toward her. "You work," Victoria blinked. "What?" "You are exhausted. Most people are. Not like you." The observation landed with surprising accuracy. Before she could ask how he knew that, Roman stepped back. "Good night, Victoria." Her name again. He said it as if he had known her for years. Victoria opened her mouth to stop him, but he was already walking away into the crowd. Within moments he disappeared among hundreds of strangers. She stood there watching until he was gone. Across the street, both black vehicles immediately pulled away and followed the direction he had taken. Victoria remained by the waterfront long after they vanished, because for the first time since this strange chain of events had begun, she was absolutely certain of one thing. Roman was not merely a man with secrets, and somewhere in those secrets was the reason powerful people seemed willing to follow him anywhere. The following Tuesday arrived wrapped in low clouds and cold autumn wind, the kind that carried the scent of salt water through downtown Seattle. Victoria spent most of the morning trying to convince herself she was overthinking everything. People met strange strangers every day. People had coincidences. People crossed paths more than once. Yet none of those explanations felt satisfying anymore. During her lunch break, she carried a paper cup of coffee into a small public park 3 blocks from the diner. The lunchtime crowd filled the walking paths. Office workers sat on benches scrolling through their phones. A street musician played soft jazz near a fountain. It felt normal, comfortingly normal. Then she saw Roman sitting alone at an outdoor chess table beneath a canopy of orange leaves. This time she did not hesitate. "You know," she said as she approached, "most mysterious people try harder not to be found." Roman glanced up from the chessboard. "Perhaps I am not trying very hard." Victoria sat across from him before he could object. "You disappeared pretty quickly the other night, and yet here you are. That is because I have questions. You have many questions." She laughed softly. Finally, an honest answer. Roman studied the chessboard. His expression remained calm, but there was something different today. Almost comfortable, a gust of wind scattered several leaves across the table. One landed beside a black night piece. Roman moved it forward. "Your bus will be late today," he said casually. Blinked. "What? 23 minutes. You checked the schedule." "No." "Then how would you know?" Roman simply moved another piece. The answer irritated her more than it should have. 2 hours later, after her shift ended, Victoria arrived at the bus stop. She checked the electronic display. On schedule 4 minutes away. She shook her head. Maybe this would finally prove he was just guessing. Then a maintenance alert appeared. Route delayed, estimated arrival 23 minutes. Victoria stared at the screen, the exact number. Not 20, not 25, 23. A chill moved down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. By Wednesday evening she had another mystery to add to the list. An elderly customer arrived at the diner shortly before closing. He ordered only coffee and sat quietly near the window. When Victoria delivered the check, the man smiled warmly. "You work very hard," he said. "Thank you," she replied politely. "A friend of mine speaks highly of you." "A friend?" "Roman." The name landed like a stone in still water. Victoria immediately sat down across from him. "You know him?" The man nodded. "Many people know him. What does he do?" A strange expression crossed the customer's face. Not amusement, not confusion. Something closer to respect. "That does not answer the question." "No," the man agreed, "it does not." Before she could press further, he reached into his coat pocket and handed her a cream address. No stamp, just her name written neatly across the front. Victoria looked up. "What is this? An opportunity?" the man replied. Then he stood, placed cash on the table, and walked out into the evening. Victoria remained frozen for several seconds before opening the envelope. Inside was a formal invitation printed on thick ivory paper. The heading read, "Marino Foundation Community Outreach Initiative." She scanned the contents twice. The organization was offering interviews for a new position with benefits, stable hours, and a salary nearly double what she currently earned. At the bottom sat a familiar signature, Roman Marino. For the first time, Victoria saw a full name attached to the mystery. The moment she read it, something clicked into place. Roman had never been wandering randomly through her life. Every appearance, every coincidence, every unanswered question seemed connected to something larger, much larger. What Victoria did not know was that at that exact moment, less than a mile away, Roman stood alone in front of a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. The lights of Seattle shimmered beneath the night sky while several advisors waited behind him in silence. None of them dared interrupt, because for the first time in decades, the man they served appeared genuinely interested in the outcome of the trial, and the invitation now resting in Victoria's hands was only the beginning. Victoria spent most of the night staring at the invitation resting on her small kitchen table. The paper looked expensive, the kind used by organizations that occupied entire floors of downtown skyscrapers. It certainly did not belong in an apartment where the refrigerator hummed louder than the television and every piece of furniture had come from a thrift store. Yet there it was, Marino Foundation. The name lingered in her thoughts long after midnight. By sunrise, she still had not decided whether the opportunity felt exciting or unsettling. Perhaps it was both. 2 days later, dressed in the nicest outfit she owned, Victoria stepped out of a rideshare vehicle in front of a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay. The building rose into the clouds like something from another world. Polished steel reflected the grey morning sky. Employees moved through revolving doors, carrying coffee cups and tablet computers. Everyone looked confident. Everyone looked like they belonged there. Victoria. She paused at the entrance and glanced once more at the invitation. The address matched. Taking a slow breath, she stepped inside. Warm light filled the lobby. Marble floors stretched beneath enormous windows. Fresh flowers stood near the reception desk. Everything felt impossibly expensive. "Miss Turner, welcome. We have been expecting you." Victoria blinked. "You have?" "Of course." The woman smiled. "Please follow me." That answer only deepened the mystery. As the elevator climbed higher and higher, Victoria watched the city shrink below. The bay shimmered beneath scattered sunlight. Ferries crossed the water like white brushstrokes. For a brief moment she forgot her nerves. Then the elevator doors opened. The office beyond looked less like a workplace and more like a private museum. Art lined the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline. Quiet conversations echoed through spacious corridors. The receptionist guided her toward a conference room and stopped. "Someone will be with you shortly." Victoria nodded and entered alone. Minutes passed, then 10 more. She checked her phone. No messages, no explanation. Finally, the door opened. Her heartbeat immediately stumbled. Roman walked inside, not the version she had met beneath rainstorms and public parks, not the man in the worn dark coat. This Roman wore a tailored charcoal suit. The sunlight caught silver cufflinks at his wrists. Every detail seemed effortless, every movement calm. For several seconds, Victoria simply stared. Roman stopped across the table. "Good morning. You work here?" she asked. It was the only question her brain could produce. A faint smile appeared, something like that. Something like that, Victoria repeated. You gave me a foundation invitation, yes. You knew I would come. I hoped you would. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Victoria looked around the office, the artwork, the views, the staff moving through hallways beyond the glass walls. Then she looked back at him. Pieces that never fit together before began sliding into place. Not all of them, just enough to change everything. Who are you? She asked quietly. Roman held her gaze for several seconds, longer than normal, longer than comfortable, yet somehow she did not look away. A man trying to make an important decision, he said. And what does that have to do with me? Before he could answer, a knock interrupted them. The door opened. 3 sharply dressed executives entered carrying folders. The moment they noticed Roman, every one of them stopped speaking. One lowered his head slightly, another stepped aside as though instinctively making room. Respect filled the room so completely that Victoria could almost feel it. No one treated him like an employee. No one treated him like a colleague. They treated him like someone far above both. Roman glanced toward them. Give us 5 minutes. No one argued. No one questioned the request. They simply left. Silence returned. Victoria slowly turned back toward him. Her pulse quickened, because for the first time since meeting him, she was no longer wondering whether Roman was hiding something. She was wondering how much. And as sunlight reflected across the glass walls surrounding them, she realized she had just stepped through a door that could never be closed again. Victoria left the tower that afternoon with more questions than answers. The invitation had been real. The opportunity had been real, and Roman Marino was clearly far more important than he had ever allowed her to believe. Yet even after spending nearly an hour in the same room with him, she still could not explain who he really was. Over the next several days, the Marino Foundation interview process moved forward surprisingly fast. Forms became meetings, meetings became training sessions became introductions to projects helping struggling families across Seattle. The work felt meaningful, real. For the first time in years, Victoria could see a future that extended beyond surviving one paycheck at a time. Friday evening arrived with clear skies and unusually warm temperatures for late autumn. Shortly after finishing a foundation orientation session, Victoria received an unexpected message from the executive assistant she had met earlier in the week. A charity gala would be taking place that evening. Attendance was encouraged for new staff members. Transportation would be provided. Victoria almost declined. Galas belonged to wealthy donors, executives, and people who understood which fork to use at formal dinners. They did not belong to waitresses from small apartments, yet curiosity won. 2 hours later, she stood inside the ballroom of the Grand Pacific Hotel overlooking Elliott Bay. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across polished floors. A string quartet played near a marble staircase. Men wore tailored suits. Women wore elegant gowns. Conversations drifted through the air like music. Victoria felt completely out of place. She accepted a sparkling water from a passing server and quietly moved toward the edge of the room. That was when she noticed him. Roman stood near the far end of the ballroom, surrounded by donors, executives, and community leaders. The contrast nearly stopped her breath. Days earlier, she had seen him sitting alone beneath rain clouds and autumn trees. Tonight, he looked as though the entire room revolved around him. People listened when he spoke. People moved aside when he walked past. Even from across the ballroom, authorities seemed to follow him naturally. Victoria watched several influential guests approach him one after another. Every conversation ended the same way. Respect, genuine respect. Yet Roman himself appeared strangely detached from the attention. His gaze drifted across the room as though searching for something else entirely. Then his eyes found hers. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade for a brief second. Roman offered a small nod. Nothing dramatic, nothing inappropriate, just acknowledgement. Somehow it felt more personal than any grand gesture could have. A few minutes later, Victoria wandered toward a quieter corridor lined with floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. Ferries crossed dark water below. It was peaceful. You look like someone trying to escape. Victoria turned. I was beginning to think you only existed in parks and rainstorms. A faint smile appeared. I have many talents, apparently. She glanced back toward the ballroom. That room treats you differently. Roman remained silent. People practically stand at attention when you walk by. Old habits. Whose habits? Roman did not answer immediately. Instead, he stepped beside the window and looked out across the bay. Do you enjoy your work at the foundation? The sudden change of subject was obvious. Victoria laughed softly. That is not an answer, no. And yet somehow you always get away with it. For a moment neither spoke. The city lights reflected across the glass. A ferry horn echoed through the night. Then Roman surprised her. "You know what I noticed the first night we met?" Victoria looked at him. What? Everyone else saw a problem they could avoid. His grey eyes settled on the water below. "You saw a person." The words landed quietly, but they carried unexpected weight. Victoria looked away first. No one had ever described that moment quite like that. Before she could respond, movement at the far end of the corridor caught her attention. Several men in dark suits had appeared near the ballroom entrance. Unlike the other guests, they were not talking or networking. They seemed focused entirely on Roman, watching, waiting. Roman noticed them too. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear, not concern. Recognition. One of the men approached as though preparing to deliver a message. Roman's jaw tightened slightly. Then, without taking his eyes off the approaching figure, he spoke quietly. "Victoria." "Yes?" "There is something important I should have told you sooner." The man in the suit continued walking toward them. The distance between them closed rapidly, and for the first time since this strange journey had begun, Victoria sensed that whatever Roman had been hiding was finally about to step out of the shadows. The approaching man stopped several feet away and lowered his head respectfully. The gesture was subtle, but Victoria noticed it immediately. Not because it was unusual. She had seen the same reaction from executives, foundation directors, and wealthy donors all evening. "Sir," the man said quietly, "the council has arrived." Roman's expression remained calm. "Thank you." The man nodded once and stepped back. No questions, no hesitation. He simply obeyed. Victoria watched him disappear into the ballroom before turning back toward Roman. "The council?" she asked. Roman exhaled slowly and looked out across the city lights. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed less interested in avoiding her questions, almost as though he had reached the point where avoiding them was no longer possible. "You once asked who I was," he said. Victoria folded her arms several times, "and every time I gave you an incomplete answer." "That is one way to describe it." A faint smile touched his face before fading. Silence settled between them. Beyond the glass, ferries crossed the dark water. Inside the ballroom, distant music drifted through crystal chandeliers and polished hallways. Then Roman finally turned toward her. "The foundation belongs to me." Victoria, that much out. "The tower belongs to me." Also not surprising. "The companies connected to it belong to me as well." Victoria stared. "All of them?" "Yes." She laughed once in disbelief. Completely. The realization landed heavily. The strange stranger from the rain-soaked bus stop was not simply wealthy. He was operating on an entirely different scale. Suddenly the luxury vehicles, the executives, the deference from everyone around him made sense. Yet one question remained larger than all the others. "Why?" she asked. Roman tilted his head slightly. "Why what? Why pretend?" Her voice softened. "Why sit alone in the rain when you clearly have access to anything you want?" The answer did not come immediately. Roman walked toward the window and rested one hand lightly against the glass. The city stretched endlessly beneath them. "Because most people behave differently when they think someone matters," he said. "And when they think someone does not?" Victoria asked. "That is when you learn who they really are." The words settled into the silence between them. Suddenly the umbrella, the bus stop, the countless encounters, the anonymous rent payment, the invitation, every piece of the puzzle began rearranging itself into a new picture. Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. "You were testing people?" Roman looked at her but did not answer. He did not need to. The truth was written across his expression, and I was part of that again. Silence. Not denial, not confirmation. Something in between. Victoria looked away first. She should have felt angry, manipulated, embarrassed. Instead, she felt something far more complicated, because despite all the secrecy, every meaningful opportunity she had received since meeting Roman had been real. The foundation was real, the work was real, the respect he showed her was real. Yet she could not ignore the fact that none of it had begun honestly. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "I know." Roman's voice carried an unfamiliar weight. Regret. Before either of them could continue, movement near the ballroom entrance caught Victoria's attention. Several distinguished men and women had gathered there. They wore formal black attire. Every one of them appeared powerful, influential. Yet what unsettled Victoria was the way they watched Roman. Not with admiration, with expectation, as though they were waiting for a decision only he could make. Roman followed her gaze. "I have to go. Because of them?" "Yes." "Who are they?" For a brief moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he answered. "People whose opinions matter more than they should." It was another incomplete answer, but this time Victoria barely noticed. because she had just learned something far more important. Roman Marino was not the mysterious drifter she had first met beneath the storm. He was the owner of the foundation, the architect behind an empire stretching across the city, the man every executive seemed to answer to, and somehow, despite all of that power, he had chosen to spend his time sitting alone on a rain-soaked bench. Roman stepped toward the ballroom entrance, then paused. "Victoria," she looked up. "Yes." His grey eyes held hers for a second, longer than usual. "The night we met changed more than you realize." Before she could ask what he meant, he walked away. The crowd parted for him almost instantly. Conversations quieted, heads turned, the entire room seemed to shift around his presence. Victoria remained standing by the window long after he disappeared into the gathering beyond the doors. Because for the first time since this strange journey had begun, she finally knew who Roman Marino was. What she did not know was why someone with that much power looked increasingly worried every time those mysterious council members appeared. The gala ended, but the questions followed Victoria home. Over the next week, her responsibilities at the foundation expanded quickly. New projects appeared on her schedule. Meetings replaced diner shifts. Community programs introduced her to neighborhoods she had never visited. The work mattered. Families received help, shelters received funding, schools received supplies. Everywhere she went, people spoke about the foundation with genuine gratitude. Yet another pattern slowly emerged. Roman's influence seemed impossible to measure. Every city official knew his name. Every non-profit director welcomed his calls. Every executive listened when he spoke. The deeper Victoria moved into the organization, the larger his world became. On Thursday afternoon, she was asked to deliver documents to a private division operating from the upper levels of the tower. The elevator required special authorization. Security checkpoints appeared on floors she had never seen before. Even the atmosphere felt different, quieter, more controlled. As the elevator doors opened, Victoria stepped into a corridor lined with dark stone walls and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seattle. The city stretched for miles beneath a silver sky. Everything about the place felt less like a corporate office and more like the headquarters of a hidden empire. An assistant guided her through the hallway before stopping outside a set of double doors. "You can leave the documents here," the woman said. Victoria nodded and placed the folder on a nearby table. As she turned to leave, voices drifted from inside the room. The doors had not fully closed. She never intended to listen, yet one sentence stopped her immediately. "The trial cannot continue indefinitely." The voice belonged to one of the council members she had seen at the gala, another replied. "His judgment has already been delayed longer than any previous cycle." Victoria froze. Trial, the same strange word she had heard referenced more than once. Before she could move away, another voice spoke, Roman's voice, calm, controlled. "The decision will be made when I determine the evidence is complete." Silence followed. Then a different council member answered, "You are allowing emotion to interfere." Victoria stepped back instinctively. The conversation felt private, important. She should leave. Yet curiosity held her in place. "Perhaps," Roman replied, "or perhaps I have seen something none of you expected." The meeting continued, but the assistant returned before Victoria could hear more. She quickly moved away and entered the elevator. During the ride down, her thoughts raced. Trial, evidence, decision, counsel. None of it sounded corporate. None of it sounded normal. That evening, she remained at the office later than usual, reviewing community outreach reports. Most employees had already gone home. The city outside had transformed into a sea of lights beneath the darkening sky. As she walked toward the elevator lobby, she noticed movement through a glass wall overlooking a private conference chamber. Roman stood alone inside. No advisors, no executives, no council members. Just Roman. He appeared tired, not physically exhausted, something deeper. The weight of responsibility seemed visible in the way he stood staring at the skyline. Before she could stop herself, Victoria entered the room. Roman turned immediately. Surprise flashed across his face. "You are still here. So are you." A faint smile appeared. Fair point. For several moments neither spoke. Then Victoria decided to take a risk. "What is the trial?" The question landed heavily. Roman's expression changed. Not anger, not annoyance, something closer to caution. He walked toward the window and looked out over the city below. Thousands of lights stretched into the distance like stars scattered across the earth. "Some questions," he said quietly, "change everything once they are answered." Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. Roman remained silent for several seconds, then he nodded, just once. Slowly, deliberately, Victoria looked at the city beyond the glass. Somewhere inside that answer was the truth connecting every mystery she had encountered since the rainy night they first met. What she did not realize was that she had already moved far closer to the center of Roman's hidden world than anyone on the council believed possible, and very soon she would discover that the empire Roman controlled was only a small part of what he had been trying to protect all along. Rain returned to Seattle 3 days later. Not the heavy storm from the night Victoria first met Roman, but a steady silver curtain that softened the skyline and blurred the city lights beyond the tower windows. By now the foundation felt familiar. The endless mystery surrounding Roman did not. The question about the trial lingered in her thoughts every day. So did the look on his face when she asked about it. He had not looked frightened, he had looked resigned, as if a door was slowly opening and he could no longer stop it. Late that evening, Victoria remained in the building after most employees had gone home. A community outreach report was due the following morning, and she wanted it finished before heading back to her apartment. The upper floors had become almost silent. Elevators moved less frequently. Hallway lights dimmed automatically to nighttime settings. Outside, rain streaked across the glass. Around 9:30, Victoria finally shut her laptop and headed toward the elevator. That was when the building lights flickered. Once, then again, not enough to cause concern, just enough to draw attention. She paused. A strange stillness settled over the corridor. Then she heard voices, low, formal, coming from one of the restricted conference chambers nearby. The door stood slightly open. Victoria had no intention of eavesdropping, but as she walked past, a familiar name stopped her cold. Roman cannot postpone this forever. The speaker was one of the council members. Another voice answered. His judgment has already compromised tradition. Victoria froze beside the doorway. The human should never have reached this stage. Human. The word sounded oddly specific, and yet she did, another council member replied. That alone should concern all of us. Victoria's pulse quickened. They were talking about her. Before she could hear more, a new voice entered the conversation. Roman, enough. Silence immediately followed. Even through the partially opened door, the authority in his voice was unmistakable. The responsibility is mine. Nobody argued. Nobody interrupted. The discussion ended as though his words alone had settled it. Victoria quietly stepped away before anyone noticed her, yet the brief conversation stayed with her all night. The next afternoon, another mystery arrived. While reviewing historical records connected to the Foundation's oldest charitable programs, she discovered references to Roman Marino stretching back far longer than seemed possible. At first, she assumed it was a naming coincidence. A grandfather, a great-grandfather, perhaps an inherited family title, but photograph after photograph told a different story. A newspaper clipping from the 1980s showed a man who looked exactly like Roman. Another image from the 1960s showed the same face, the same posture. The same eyes, no aging, no visible difference at all. Victoria stared at the photographs for nearly 10 minutes. Her rational mind searched desperately for explanations. Maybe the images had been mislabeled. Maybe they belonged to different relatives. Maybe she was imagining the resemblance. Then she found a black and white photograph dated 1948. The man standing beside city officials looked exactly like Roman Marino. Not similar, not related, exactly. A chill moved through her body. The office suddenly felt colder. Outside, thunder rolled across the bay. Victoria slowly gathered the photographs into a stack and carried them toward Roman's private office. She needed an explanation, needed one now. The executive floor was nearly empty when she arrived. Light spilled from beneath Roman's office door. She knocked once and stepped inside. Roman stood near the window overlooking the storm. He turned as she entered. The moment he saw the photographs in her hands, his expression changed. Not surprise, recognition. As if he had known this moment would eventually come. Victoria placed the photographs on his desk one by one, 1948, 1967, 1983, 2026. The same face stared back from every image. Rain tapped softly against the glass behind him. Neither spoke. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. Tell me how this is possible. Roman looked down at the photographs, then back at her. For several seconds, the storm outside became the only sound in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard before, because the truth is much older than you think. Thunder rolled across the bay as Roman stood motionless behind his desk. The photographs remained scattered between them like pieces of evidence from a case neither of them fully understood. Victoria searched his face for signs of a joke, an explanation, anything ordinary enough to fit the world she knew. She found none. Rain traced silver lines across the glass walls behind him while Seattle glowed beneath the storm. "How old are you?" she finally asked. Roman lowered his eyes briefly toward the oldest photograph. "Older than this city." The answer should have sounded impossible. Instead, it felt strangely inevitable. Every mystery, every coincidence, suddenly pointed towards something far beyond wealth or influence. Victoria took a slow breath. "What are you?" Silence settled over the room. Roman walked toward the window and looked out at the storm. The city lights reflected faintly across the glass. "There are truths hidden from the world for a reason," he said quietly. "Not because they are dangerous, because people are." Victoria folded her arms. "That is not an answer." He turned toward her, "but it is the beginning of one." For several seconds neither moved. Then Roman approached a concealed panel built into the wall beside his office. He placed his hand against a biometric scanner. A soft tone sounded. The wall slid open. Beyond it stretched a private elevator Victoria had never seen before. "Come with me," Roman said. "If you want the truth, you deserve all of it." The elevator descended far below the tower. Floor numbers disappeared. Concrete gave way to polished stone. The city noise vanished completely. Victoria stood beside Roman in silence as the cabin moved deeper underground. Finally, the doors opened. She stepped into a vast chamber unlike anything she had imagined. Stone columns rose toward vaulted ceilings illuminated by warm amber light. Ancient carvings covered the walls. Massive shelves held books that appeared centuries old. The air felt still, timeless, as though the room existed outside the modern world above it. Victoria slowly turned in place. "This is beneath the tower?" Roman smiled faintly. "The same way many important things survive." Quietly, they walked deeper into the chamber. History surrounded them. Paintings, documents. Artifacts preserved behind glass. Some looked hundreds of years old, others looked older still. Then Victoria noticed a painting hanging alone at the far end of the hall. Her footsteps slowed. The figure in the painting wore dark formal clothing from another era. His expression was calm. His eyes were unmistakable. Roman, not someone who resembled him. Roman exactly. Victoria stared at the date engraved beneath the frame, 1712. Her heartbeat quickened. "That is impossible." Most people would say that. Roman stood beside her. Unfortunately, impossibility and truth are not always the same thing. Victoria looked from the painting to the man standing beside her. No difference, no aging, no explanation her mind could accept. Outside, thunder echoed faintly through distant foundations. She whispered. Roman remained silent for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "There are others like me." Victoria felt the room grow colder. "Others?" "Yes." He looked toward the ancient records lining the walls. "We have existed longer than most human civilizations remember." The statement should have sounded absurd. Yet standing inside this hidden chamber, surrounded by centuries of evidence, it felt terrifyingly real. "The council you have seen, the traditions, the trial, none of them belong to the world you know." Victoria's pulse hammered in her ears. Every mystery suddenly moved toward a single unavoidable conclusion. "Roman," he met her gaze. For the first time since they met, there was no disguise left, no half-truths, no diversions, only honesty. "Victoria," he said quietly, "the reason those photographs never changed is because I am not human." The words hung in the air between them long after Roman spoke them. Victoria stared at him, waiting for the punchline that never came. The underground chamber felt impossibly quiet. Ancient books rested on shelves older than the United States itself. Paintings from centuries past watched from stone walls. Every piece of evidence pointed toward the same impossible truth. Roman did not look away. He did not try to soften the revelation or explain it away. He simply stood there, not human. Victoria repeated softly. The phrase felt unreal even as she spoke it. Roman nodded once. "No." Thunder echoed faintly through the foundations above. Victoria looked toward the portrait, dated 1712, and then back at the man standing beside her. For the first time since they met, the mystery was no longer hiding in shadows. It stood directly in front of her. "The council," she said slowly. "They are like you." "Yes." "And the trial." Expression shifted slightly. "Not fear, not uncertainty, something heavier. The trial is the reason I met you." Victoria felt her heartbeat quicken. Of all the answers she expected, that was not one of them. Roman guided her deeper into the chamber until they reached a circular room illuminated by warm amber light. At its center stood a stone table engraved with symbols worn smooth by centuries. Around it hung portraits of men and women from different eras. Some wore clothing from distant centuries. Others, yet all carried the same unmistakable presence. Authority, responsibility, longevity. "These were the rulers before me," Roman said quietly. "Each inherited the same obligation. Victoria looked around the room. What obligation? Roman remained silent for a moment. Then he answered, to determine whether humanity is still worthy of our protection. The statement sent a chill through her. Protection from what? From ourselves. His voice remained calm. We are powerful. We always have been. For centuries our leaders maintained a single belief, that strength exists to serve, not to dominate. Victoria listened carefully. Roman continued. But every generation eventually faces the same question. Are human beings still capable of kindness when there is no reward for it? Compassion when no one is watching? Decency when it costs them something? Suddenly the umbrella, the rain, the bench, the anonymous acts of generosity, the impossible coincidences, everything aligned. Victoria looked at him in disbelief. You were testing me. Roman did not deny it. The first night was not supposed to matter. What do you mean? The trial requires observation. His eyes moved toward the distant portraits. A ruler must find evidence that goodness still exists in the world, evidence strong enough to justify continuing the traditions that have protected humanity for centuries. Victoria struggled to absorb everything at once. For the first time, Roman looked genuinely tired. The weight she had sensed for weeks finally became visible. Then I stepped down. Silence filled the chamber. Victoria stared at him. That is it. Roman shook his head. No. His voice grew quieter. If the trial fails, the entire system ends with me. The realization landed heavily. This was never about a foundation, never about a company, never about wealth. It was about a decision centuries in the making, a decision that somehow involved her. The council thinks I have delayed my judgment, Roman said. They believe I became too emotionally invested. Victoria lowered her eyes. Did you? Another silence. Longer this time, more personal. When Roman finally answered, his voice carried a truth no council report could measure. Yes. The room felt smaller, warmer, more vulnerable. Victoria looked at the portraits surrounding them and understood something she had missed all along. For 600 years, Roman had been making decisions for others, carrying responsibilities no ordinary person could imagine. Yet somewhere between a rainy bus stop and this hidden chamber beneath Seattle, the ruler conducting a test had become part of it himself. Unfortunately for both of them, the council had already noticed, and by the time the next night arrived, Roman would be forced to make the final judgment that could change both their futures forever. The following evening arrived beneath a sky of drifting clouds and pale moonlight. Seattle shimmered below the tower, unaware that decisions being made beneath its streets would soon determine the future of a hidden world that had existed alongside it for centuries. Every answer Roman revealed had only uncovered deeper truths: the council, the trial, the responsibility he carried, and most of all, the realization that the man she met on a rain-soaked bench had never truly been testing her alone. Somewhere along the way, he had begun questioning himself. Shortly after sunset, a black vehicle arrived outside her apartment building. The driver offered no explanation. None was necessary. Victoria already knew where she was being taken. The underground chamber looked different that night, more formal, more solemn. Additional lights illuminated the ancient stone hall. Council members stood gathered around the circular table she had seen before. Their expressions revealed little. Some appeared curious, others skeptical. A few seemed openly concerned. Roman stood at the far end of the chamber. Dressed in black, he appeared less like a businessman and more like what he truly was, a ruler. The room fell silent as Victoria entered. She immediately felt dozens of eyes settle upon her, yet no one spoke. Finally, one of the council members broke the silence. The human has arrived. Victoria disliked the way the word sounded. Human, as though it separated her from everyone else in the room. Roman noticed her reaction immediately. Her name is Victoria, he said calmly. The correction was simple, but its effect was immediate. No one argued. The council member inclined his head slightly and continued. Very well. Another council member stepped forward. The purpose of this gathering is not to judge her. His gaze shifted toward Roman. It is to hear your final decision. Silence returned. Victoria looked toward Roman. The weight she had sensed for weeks now stood fully exposed. 600 years of leadership. Generations of responsibility. One final judgment. Roman slowly approached the ancient table. When this trial began, he said, I believed it would confirm what many of us already suspected. Several council members exchanged glances. Roman continued. I believed compassion had become conditional, that kindness existed only when rewards were expected, that humanity had forgotten how to care for strangers. His voice echoed softly through the chamber. Then a woman missed her bus, gave away her only umbrella, and walked home through a storm. No one moved. Victoria lowered her eyes. Roman looked directly at the council. She expected nothing in return. She knew nothing about me. She simply saw another person in need. The chamber remained silent. The trial required evidence. Goodness still exists, Roman continued. I found that evidence. One council member stepped forward. In a single person, Roman's answer came without hesitation. No, in a choice. The distinction changed everything. Victoria saw it immediately. Roman was not arguing that she was special because of who she was. He was arguing that the decision she made proved something larger about humanity itself. Another council member folded his hands. And what of your personal involvement? The question carried obvious meaning. Roman met the challenge directly. I became personally invested. Several members shifted uneasily. Roman did not retreat, and because of that I examined my conclusions more carefully than ever before. His eyes briefly found Victoria across the room. The result remains the same. The council chamber fell completely silent. For several long seconds no one spoke. Then the eldest member slowly rose from his chair. The trial is concluded, one by one, not in protest, not in disagreement, in acceptance. The decision had been made. The centuries-old process was over. Relief spread quietly across the room, not celebration, something deeper, resolution. The burden Roman had carried for so long was finally lifting. Yet as Victoria watched him, she realized the most important decision had not been made by the council at all. It was waiting between the two of them, and when the gathering finally ended, Roman began walking toward her with an expression she had never seen before. For the first time in 6 centuries, he no longer looked like a man carrying the weight of an entire world. He looked like a man hoping for an answer. The council chamber gradually emptied until only a handful of lights remained glowing against the ancient stone walls. The centuries-old gathering had ended. The trial was complete. For the first time since Victoria had entered Roman's hidden world, there were no secrets waiting behind locked doors, and no impossible truths still hidden in the shadows. The future now depended on something much simpler: honesty. Roman stopped a few feet in front of her. Around them, council members quietly departed through distant corridors. Their footsteps faded until silence settled over the chamber once again. Victoria looked at him differently now, not as a stranger, not as a wealthy businessman, not as a ruler carrying the weight of generations. She looked at him as the man who had sat alone in the rain holding an umbrella someone offered without expecting anything in return. "So that is it?" she asked softly. Roman's expression relaxed in a way she had never seen before. "The trial is finished, and your decision?" A faint smile appeared. "You already know my decision." Victoria did. The answer had been hidden inside every choice Roman made since the beginning. Every opportunity, every moment he delayed the council's demands because he believed something worth protecting still existed in the world. For a moment neither spoke. Then Victoria took a slow breath. "You know what bothers me?" Roman tilted his head slightly. "What? You could have introduced yourself honestly from the beginning." To her surprise, Roman laughed quietly. The sound was warm and unexpectedly human. "That is true. Instead, you chose the most complicated approach imaginable." "Also true. And somehow I am still talking to you, for which I remain grateful." The chamber suddenly felt lighter. The burden hanging over both of them for weeks seemed to dissolve into the silence. Roman looked toward the portraits surrounding the room. Generations of rulers watched from painted canvases. "For 600 years, he said quietly, I believed leadership meant carrying everything alone." Victoria followed his gaze, and now Roman turned back toward her. "Now I think I was wrong." The honesty in his voice left no room for misunderstanding. Hours later, they emerged from beneath the tower and stepped into the cool Seattle night. Clouds drifted across the moon. The city felt unchanged, completely unaware that an ancient judgment had just reshaped the future of a hidden kingdom beneath its streets. Yet for Victoria, everything felt different. The following weeks passed quietly. The foundation continued its work. Community programs expanded. New projects reached neighborhoods that needed them most. Life moved forward, but something else changed as well. Roman no longer disappeared behind walls of secrecy. He still carried responsibilities few people could imagine, but he stopped carrying them alone. Sometimes he visited community centers alongside Victoria. Sometimes they walked the waterfront after work. Sometimes they simply shared coffee while watching ferries cross Elliott Bay. No grand declarations were needed. Trust had arrived long before either of them noticed. Winter gradually surrendered to spring. Then one afternoon, rain returned to Seattle. Not a storm, just a gentle rain drifting through the city like a familiar memory. Victoria stood beneath a bus stop shelter waiting for a delayed route after visiting a community project across town. The moment she looked up, she smiled. Roman was walking toward her through the rain. No security detail, no council members, no hidden agendas. Just Roman. When he reached the shelter, he stopped beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The memory of another rainy evening seemed to hang between them. Finally, Roman opened an umbrella. "You know," he said, "I have been meaning to return this favor." Victoria laughed softly. It only took a few months and 600 years of bad habits. Together they stepped beneath the umbrella. Rain tapped gently against the fabric overhead. Cars passed. City lights reflected across wet pavement. The same bus stop, the same weather. Yet nothing was the same anymore. Months earlier, a tired waitress had given away her only umbrella to a stranger she thought the world had forgotten. Now she stood beside the man whose decision had changed the future of an ancient kingdom. More importantly, she stood beside someone who had finally learned that power alone could never create hope. Sometimes hope arrived carrying a simple umbrella in the middle of a storm. As they walked away together beneath the rain, neither of them stood alone, and for the first time in a very long time, the future looked brighter than the past.